We'll
probably be going right now for tax reform, which we could have done earlier, but this really would have worked out better if we could have had some Democrat support. I would say that we will probably start going very, very strongly for the big tax cuts and tax reform. That'll be next.
So the only question is today's news, will that make the rest of the game plan harder to roll out? Here to help, Gina Loudon and Dr. Peter Morici. Dr. Morici, I'll start with you. You know, the mainstream media is going to go nuts on this. They're going to be cheering it and now saying you've got a wounded president, and it's going to make it just that much harder to get through a lot of other parts of his agenda, which will call for similar reconciliation and several steps through the legislative process.
Well, it's going to be much tougher now. There's no question about it. He could have led with tax reform, but tax reform has just as many competing elements that are difficult to compromise within the Republican Party. So his real problem, his most basic problem, is that he can't govern in the middle, and that is bring over moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans to come up with a consensus, even if it's more Republicans than Democrats, to pass a bill. He's very much like an NFL team that has lost its first two games. Tough to make the playoffs. The immigration order and health care. Tough to make the playoffs now.
Well, you know what? New England lost a game or two and didn't do too bad. Of course, they didn't have their star quarterback. But Gina, you know, the other parts of the agenda, though, I would say would have less friction. I mean, everyone wants infrastructure. Even Democrats want infrastructure. And everyone wants lower taxes. So, you know, I would be shocked if we saw the same sort of resistance that we saw with respect to Obamacare.
I agree with you, Charles. And as you know, I believe this president is a master negotiator. I believe he's always playing chess while the rest of the punditry and the rest of the establishment is playing checkers. And I think that this is the same thing here. I think he's tested the waters well. He proved through this whole health care situation that he could get his people to the table. He also proved that Paul Ryan couldn't do the same. And he has left this entire health care situation in the laps of the Democrat. I think the laps of the Democrats as we go forward, watch for him to use what he learned here and to what he showed to the American people in sort of exposing the things that the establishment GOP and the establishment Democrats are not willing to do for the American people. When this comes to tax cuts, I think this will be really key.
Peter, can he do tax cuts first and do so-called tax reform, tackling the whole tax code later on? Ronald Reagan did them like years apart.
Well, tax cuts without doing tax reform means increasing the deficit. So it's really up to the Republicans to decide whether they want to do that. Now, if he tries to cut taxes without tax reform, so he has less revenue, then he can't use reconciliation without a change in the rules. So that's problematic.
Gina, you were shaking your head.
Yeah, tax cuts increase revenue. And we know this. If you just look back and you ask JFK or you ask Reagan or you ask Bush, there are a million examples where when tax cuts happen, it ultimately increases revenue. And I think President Trump is well aware of this, and I think he can make that case to the American people.
Peter, the team that starts out 0-2, if they can cherry pick their next opponent so that they get a W on the board, to your point, would it be, in this case, infrastructure, tax cuts / reform, the wall? What should President Trump tell the American people on Monday is the next item on the agenda?
Well, he's already made his statement that it's taxes, but if I were him, I would be looking at two things: a much better approach to immigration reform, and infrastructure. Immigration reform costs no money.
And when you say reform, is that a euphemism for cutting the amount of legal immigration into the country?
I think it's more like having a different composition of immigration, and that is emphasizing employment skills. About 2/3 of the immigrants that come into the United States at this time are for family reunification, not for the reasons of, you know, bringing in skills that we lack. And I'm not talking about H-1Bs necessarily. So basically having the Canadian system where you can point to Canada and say, look what those good liberals are doing. You know, use them as examples. Liberals love to point that out. So I think he could do that. And infrastructure is a winner. But in order to, again, pass infrastructure without increasing the deficit, he has to impose more gasoline taxes or something.
All right, guys, we're going to have to leave it there.